I wouldn't put an electric blanket on for anything. First, I'd be worried I might get electrocuted. No, I don't trust technology. But I mean, the main thing, Wally, is that I think that that kind of comfort just separates you from reality in a very direct way.
You mean?
I mean, if you don't have that electric blanket and your apartment is cold and you need to put on another blanket or go into the closet and pile up coats on top of the blanket you have, well, then you know it's cold. And that sets up a link of things. You have compassion for the well, is the person next to you cold? Are there other people in the world who are cold? What a cold night. I like the cold. My God, I never realized. I don't want a blanket. It's fun being cold. I can snuggle up against you even more because it's cold. All sorts of things occur to you. Turn on that electric blanket and it's like taking a tranquilizer. It's like being lobotomized by watching television. I think you enter the dream world again. I mean, what does it do to us, Wally, living in an environment where something as massive as the seasons or winter or cold don't in any way affect us? I mean, we're animals after all. I mean, what does that mean? I think that means that instead of living under the sun and the moon and the sky and the stars, we're living in a fantasy world of our own making.
I mean, really, tell me, why do we require a trip to Mount Everest in order to be able to perceive one moment of reality? I mean, is Mount Everest more real than New York? I mean, isn't New York real? I mean, you see, I think if you could become fully aware of what existed in a cigar store next door to this restaurant, I think it would just blow your brains out. I mean, isn't there just as much reality to be perceived in the cigar store as there is on Mount Everest? I mean, what do you think? You see, I think that not only is there nothing more real about Mount Everest, I think there's nothing that different in a certain way. I mean, because reality is uniform in a way, so that if your perceptions are, if your own mechanism is operating correctly, it would become irrelevant to go to Mount Everest and sort of absurd because, of course, on some level, obviously it's very different from a cigar store on 7th Avenue. But
Well, I agree with you, Wally. But the problem is that people can't see the cigar store now. Things don't affect people the way they used to. It may very well be that 10 years from now, people will pay $10,000 in cash to be castrated just in order to be affected by something.
Well, why do you think that is? Why is that? Is it just because people are lazy today or they're bored? Are we just like bored, spoiled children who've just been lying in the bathtub all day, just playing with their plastic duck, and now they're just thinking, well, what can I do?
Okay, yes. We are bored. We're all bored now. But has it ever occurred to you, Wally, that the process that creates this boredom that we see in the world now may very well be a self-perpetuating, unconscious form of brainwashing created by a world totalitarian government based on money, and that all of this is much more dangerous than one thinks, and it's not just a question of individual survival, Wally, but that somebody who's bored is asleep, and somebody who's asleep will not say no? See, I keep meeting these people. Just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. And when I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert who had devoted his life to saving trees. He just got back from Washington, lobbying to save the redwoods. He's 84 years old. He always travels with a backpack because he never knows where he's going to be tomorrow. And when I met him at Findhorn, he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, "New York, yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers who keep talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia, where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made, or to even see it as a prison." And then he went into his pocket and he took out a seed for a tree and he said, "This is a pine tree." He put it in my hand and he said, "Escape before it's too late."
Simulator, and I was curious, how did they do it? You have to do flight simulator, how did they do it over the ocean? Well, check this out. We're on Microsoft.com, and let me read this here. The RQD algorithm, as published, is really intended for flat Earth terrain, where the sea level elevation reference is assumed to be an infinite plane. Since Flight Simulator model the Earth's curvature, we had to modify the algorithm a bit. The main object is that the unmodified RQT tend to eliminate nearly all the mesh vertices over large open expanses of ocean, which is interpreted as being completely flat. Now, if you were going to create a model of reality and you're doing around the ball, but it doesn't work over the ocean, you have to make it a plane. So, I gotta tell you guys, this, and gals, this doesn't make any sense. This is not a positive proof for the globe. So, as I was going around and looking at my my little tab to see, okay, is that a proof for a globe, or is it not a proof for or against, or it's definitely a proof that it's not a ball? I gotta tell you, this doesn't look good. No matter how you go around it, you can't explain why when you take off, the ball, Earth, doesn't go down. And if you're not happy with this example, I'm going to make it 10 times as big. Okay? I'm going to do another one. If there's people in the comment who think that it's just because it's not big enough, I'm going to do it for you. I'll be happy to do it. And I know the Earth is big, but it doesn't change the rules of perspective. So, as you can hear, I'm pretty excited about this. This is just, I can't believe I've never seen it before. Okay, so enough for my rant. Let's look at our board and see where that leads us. So let's look at our scorecard once again. Yesterday or the day before, I made a video where it talks about different speed on the globe Earth, and how I've never felt that there was a change when I was traveling Cancun, Montreal, Cancun in the same day, many times a week. So, you know, with the explanation of physicists, I was like, okay, this is not a proof nor a disproof, but it was definitely weird. So that was not a negative proof for the globe. So that's why we have this one here. But the one I did today, I've put a proof that it's not a globe, and I have a hard time believing I'm saying this, but I'm calling out all the debunkers out there. Do you need me to make it 100 times bigger compared to the airplane, just to make sure, for you to be able to really grasp the idea? Because I'm losing my mind here. This is not a proof that it's a globe at all. It completely disproved the globe. I don't know what I'm on right now, if that's true, but there's a lot more research to do. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for subscribing to this channel. Thank you for following this journey, and I'll see you soon. Take care.
If a pilot is flying around the curve of the Earth, then he should be dipping the nose down every 5 minutes. He should be dipping the nose down to stay around the curve. But the thing that really got me interested was, as you say, the gyroscope. In a plane, there is an artificial horizon. Okay, and it's based on a gyroscope. And if you spin a gyroscope on a surface, it will want to stay upright. You can twist and tilt the surface as much as you like, the gyroscope will stay upright. So, if a plane has a gyroscope and it starts following the curve of the Earth, the gyroscope would stay upright, which means the artificial horizon will start to roll backwards. But it doesn't. That's absolute proof that a plane flies over a flat surface rather than a curved one. Because I asked the pilot on my last flight, you know, do you ever notice the artificial horizon rolling backwards? He said, no, but the artificial horizon has complex electronics in it to make sure it knows where it is on the Earth and it compensates. But I went to the manufacturer of the artificial horizon, and they confirmed to me that it's completely mechanical, nothing electronic in it whatsoever. So it's literally just a gyroscope that can freely move. So that right there is proof to me that you know, planes fly over a plane. None of it makes sense. The problem is that we're taught as children, you know, this ball Earth lie, and you know, you might ask as a child, you know, what about the people in Australia? You know, they're standing on the bottom of the globe, won't they fall off? And your teacher says, no, gravity. And you go, oh, okay. And you never go back to that question. But when you go back to it as an adult and start looking at it with a critical eye, right, the whole thing falls apart. As you say, the globe is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a leading astronomer in America,
I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
tells us that the Earth is not a perfect circle. It is actually an oblate spheroid. It's squashed and wider at the equator. Yeah.
So Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning, and it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere. It's oblate, and officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. But not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator.
A little chubbier.
A little chubbier.
Yeah.
Chubby's a good way. It's like pear-shaped.
So my question to him would be, why is there land at the equator? Because water will move more readily than rock. So if the Earth is spinning, the water will be collected at the equator. I mean, if you spin a wet tennis ball, okay, you spin a wet tennis ball, the water shoots off at the equator, essentially. So all the water will be gathered around the equator. So why is there land at the equator? Doesn't make any sense. The other thing that's about the spinning Earth is looking at the stars. Now, directly above the axis of spin is the pole star, Polaris, okay, directly over the North Pole. And we're told that the reason that all the stars spin around the North Star is because the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Okay, seems to make sense, because if you put a long exposure camera pointing at the North Star, you'll see the stars will make perfect circles around, perfect star trails. The only problem is the Earth is also orbiting the Sun at 67,000 miles an hour. Okay, the Sun is moving, dragging the Earth and all the planets up that way or that way at 600,000 miles an hour. So why do we see perfect circles? You know, because that's the slowest speed, that's slowest motion in that mix. And yet the Earth is moving 67 times faster that way and 600 times faster that way. So you should see the stars do all sorts of strange motions, but you don't. You only see them make these perfect circles. That tells me that it's the stars that are moving, not the Earth. The thing is, what the scientists will give you is calculations and and theories why that happens. But we have experience. We see things and they either make sense or they don't make sense. And what the scientists do is substitute our common sense and our intuition for calculations and theory. And we're supposed to believe the calculations rather than what we experience ourselves. There was a famous experiment back in the 1800s in England called the Bedford Levels experiment. Now, the Bedford Levels is a canal that is perfectly straight for 6 miles. Okay, so what a chap called Samuel Rowbottom did was he took a telescope, put it in the water about 8 inches above the water, and he had a friend, in a rowboat with a flag on the back, row all the way to the other end, and he was able to see the flag on the back of the rowboat the whole distance. Now, according to spherical trigonometry, the curve of the Earth is 8 inches per mile squared. So over 5 miles, that's 5 times 5, 25, times 8, which is 200, works out, that's 200 inches, which works out at 16 feet. That means the boat should have been 16 feet below the horizon. He shouldn't have been able to see the boat. Now, the scientists will say, oh, refraction and this and light bending around the Earth and stuff. But the fact is, you know, it's perfectly flat, and he in his book he puts forward many arguments that show that, or many experiments that show the Earth is always perfectly flat. They say that you see the mast, you know, go down last. It's literally just the way your vision works. Yeah, it's perspective and atmospherics basically. The limit of your vision is supposedly 3 miles, and then after 3 miles you're supposed to see the boat start to go over the horizon. It's funny that Neil deGrasse Tyson again says that explains that you can't see the curvature of the Earth from a plane. He says this: you can't see the curvature of the Earth from a plane because you're not high enough. The Earth is so big that you can't get high enough to see the curvature. Yet you can apparently see a boat go over the curvature over the distance of 3 miles, which doesn't make sense. The thing is, when you look out and you see a boat start to go over the horizon, if you suddenly get a pair of binoculars and look, it comes back again. And once it goes out of the sight of your binoculars, if you get a telescope, yeah, it comes back again. It doesn't go over any curve of the horizon. What we found, many people have done experiments with very high-powered zoom cameras, and they've watched a boat sail out to sea, and they've just kept trained on this boat. And what they see is, after a very long distance, you see an atmospheric effect where the bottom of the boat disappears and the top of the boat inverts, so you see a sort of mirror image. And that, with your eyesight, you know, basically the bottom of the boat just melts into the horizon. One of the best examples of that is the Antwerp Notre Dame spire, which can be seen something like 240 kilometers away from from the spire. So that should be over a mile below the horizon, and you can still see it. There's been a few famous examples just recently of a man who took a picture across the Great Lakes from Michigan and was able to see, I believe it's Chicago, which he shouldn't have been able to see. And the television station basically said it was a mirage.
This is from Joshua Nowicki, and what you're seeing here is a mirage. We typically would not be able to see this from the Lake Michigan shore. We talked about this last night. Conditions are right on the lake that we're actually seeing a mirage of the Chicago skyline.
But they always say it's a mirage, but for a mirage to happen, you have to have very specific atmospheric conditions. And there have been so many people who've seen exactly the same thing on different days, different seasons, always the same. You know, it's not a mirage. It's simply that you're looking across a plane. You see in a kind of pyramid shape. Yeah, you have a horizon at your eye level, and everything above the horizon will go down into the horizon. Yeah, everything below the horizon will seem to go up. Just like if you're in a long hallway, you'll see that the walls will start to move in, and the roof and the floor will start to move into the center. Yeah, so literally between you and the object you're looking at, there's all sorts of things, sort of like waves going up and down, and while you can't see them, if they're beyond the limit of your sight, sometimes they can still obscure what you're looking at. But it's just because they're between you and it. And it's just the way, it's literally perspective. It's better if I could draw a diagram, but it's a very difficult subject to get your head around if you're not used to it. But it is perspective. One sort of other proof is there's a place in Bolivia called Salar de Uyuni, which is a salt flat. It's literally 100 miles wide one way and 80 miles across. And it's perfectly flat. And when it rains, literally you get an inch of water, and it looks like a perfect mirror. Now, how does that happen on a sphere? Yeah, it shows you that, you know, if you're one end of this salt flat, you can see perfectly clearly the other end, 100 miles away. So it's just showing you that, you know, the Earth is flat, and without the effect of the waves in the sea, you'll be able to see a whole lot further. If you were to go to NASA and download one of their photos of the Earth in the moon's sky and put it in Photoshop, okay, drop the saturation and the levels down, you'll see that the Earth has been pasted in, because you'll see a rectangular box around the Earth. It's all fraud, it's all fake. Pretty much everything NASA puts out is fraudulent. There are no images of Earth from space. The only one that NASA actually claims is a photograph was from 1972, and it's the famous picture. It's got Africa sort of near the top, and it's the same picture they've been using for the last 40 or 50 years in every textbook. Every other image is what they call a composite. It's Photoshop.
There was another layer to sort of simulate the atmosphere.
And then there's this little bright spot.
It's called the specular highlight. So it's the reflection of sunlight off of water.
Those are the pieces, but you can't just slap them all together.
It just didn't look realistic. It looks kind of flat, or the clouds are sort of too see-through. So I just hit Command Z a lot.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space. But I've looked at these images over and over again, trying to sort of get the essence of it. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
And many of us have been looking at these images of Earth, including the one they call the Big Blue Marble, which was released in 2002, I think. Again, when you zoom into it with Photoshop, you'll see where they've used the clone tool in Photoshop to take a picture of one of the clouds and stamp it in various places around the picture. They got lazy. In another image, they've even photoshopped the word sex in the clouds, which is a subliminal tool they use to get people to sort of relate to something. They literally, you can look at this and you can find it on NASA's website. In a video I'm working on at the moment, I've got a video from what they call the Galileo space probe. As it left Earth, it took a series of shots of Earth, apparently, and you see that over the course of 25 hours, the clouds never move. Okay, now I happened to find some pictures of satellite pictures of Earth, and I noticed that in these separately taken satellite shots, the clouds were exactly the same as the ones in this Galileo shot. So it's a cloud map. It would be very simple indeed to just silence everybody, you know, put an end to this topic once and for all, turn the Hubble round and show us Earth in real time, zooming in onto a place so that we can see what's happening at that place, and we know that there is something up there looking down on us from space. But they will not do it. They can't do it. It doesn't exist. It literally doesn't exist. When you go onto the plane tracking software, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of flights over the northern hemisphere, and you can track those flights from beginning to end. When you look at any flight in the southern hemisphere, what you'll find is the flight takes off and disappears off the tracking, usually about an hour after takeoff, and then later on will reappear an hour before landing. Now, there's no explanation for it. I mean, the point is that distances are very different, and distances and flight plans are very different on the flat Earth than they are on the ball. And when you look at flights in the southern hemisphere, they make some really crazy, you know, sort of deviations. So, for instance, if we look on here, let's say a flight from Cape Town over here to Australia, say Sydney in Australia, they will take you to Dubai first, somewhere around here, yes. Just recently there was a case of a woman who was pregnant on a flight, and she was her waters broke on the flight. And I think it was from the Philippines to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And again, if you look on this map, you're from around here somewhere to here. Okay. Now they were flying across, and literally her waters broke, and they had to divert. They had to land. So instead of either going back to the Philippines or going on to Los Angeles, they landed in Alaska. Which again, if you look on the flat map, it's again a straight path. Santiago, Chile to Australia, mm-hmm. right? Will usually stop in Los Angeles. Again, you can see on the flat map that it's again a straight path. It all seems to make sense, and if the only thing that would sort of confirm it or disprove it would be GPS, but you know, hey ho, GPS doesn't work in the southern hemisphere. This is an issue because there have been a few people who said they've taken flights that have taken only 14 hours, and they're direct flights from Australia to South America. Now, somebody has actually redrawn the flat map to take into account these, the distances, and apparently the distances work out. I haven't seen the map myself, but I should be looking further into it. But yes, up until these people came forward, and again, I haven't seen any real evidence that they have taken these flights. They told me they've taken these flights, but who knows? They can actually advertise a flight that's direct. You know, they can price it out of the range of most people to take, and then if anybody does take it, they could cancel it. I don't think any flights actually fly directly over the North Pole at all. I think they skirt the North Pole, mm-hmm. but I don't think they fly directly over the actual pole. So mm-hmm. I don't know if it's to do with magnetics. The only thing I do know is that nothing flies over the South Pole, because again, on a flat map, the South Pole, the continent of Antarctica, is the ring around the Earth. So you know, you can't fly over the ring and get anywhere. That's why we're not allowed to go there. I mean, think about it. It's the only treaty that's all these countries have signed and never broken and completely agreed on. It's the only one. And you know, what treaty is there that everybody's agreed on? We're being kept away from it for a reason. You know, they have some scientific bases there, yeah, and literally it's controlled by the military. If you try and go there by yourself, you will be sort of picked up and escorted back. There was a guy called Jarls Anderhoy who tried to take a mission to the Antarctica, and he was picked up and taken back by the military. It's a good reason, because they don't want you finding out what's beyond. Admiral Byrd he actually did four expeditions, and most of them were military expeditions with huge military groups. Thousands of people, planes, boats, the works. And yes, he confirms in an interview that he discovered a continent as big as the continental United States out there, that was with warm water lakes and mountains and everything, that was completely uninhabited. And he described it as the other side of the South Pole to Middle America. So on the globe, that means it would be somewhere in the Indian Ocean. There's a huge continent that nobody knows about. So yeah, there's more going on than meets the eye. The other thing is, after Admiral Byrd came back after his last expedition, Antarctica was sealed off, and both America and the Russians started firing nuclear missiles straight up. Now, in America, that was called Project Operation Fishbowl, and it came under something called Project Dominic. Well, Fishbowl makes sense because it seems like Admiral Byrd found the edge of the dome, okay, while he was out there, and as soon as he left there, they started firing missiles straight up, I believe, to try and test how far that dome went. If you look at the footage of these explosions, what you'll see is an explosion. Well, when a bomb goes off in midair, it's a fireball. It expands in all directions and mostly up. Okay. Now, if you look at these explosions on Operation Fishbowl, they explode outwards in a ring, which means it's exploding against something because it can't rise with the heat. So it's exploding against something and exploding outwards. Okay, and the middle of the explosion, you'll see it glows, hot, and then it cools over time. So it looks to me like they were exploding against a dome. Now, I said it was Operation Fishbowl, obviously Fishbowl, but there's a chap called Rob Skiba who discovered that the Project Dominic, the word Dominic means of the Lord, Fishbowl of the Lord. So I believe they clearly know that we're in an enclosed system, and Admiral Byrd found the edge, and they've tested to see how far it goes up. They will also say that if a sniper is trying to hit something a great distance, a couple of miles away, they have to take into consideration the spinning of the Earth, because they say that as the bullet leaves the muzzle of the gun, it's now independent of the rotation of the Earth. So, the Earth will spin away from where the bullet, and you have to take that into account. They say that about artillery shells as well, but it's not true. If that was true, a sniper would have to spend ages and ages calculating how to make that shot, and they don't. They literally take into consideration the wind and the elevation, and they don't take the Coriolis effect into consideration at all. Also, planes. If that works for bullets, if bullets, as soon as they leave the Earth, they're now independent of the spin, then why doesn't it work for planes? Yeah. There's a video on YouTube that actually tries to explain that the Coriolis effect works by using the example of a paper plane. You have to throw it. If you throw it north, the Earth will spin and the plane will land sort of east. But if you take the idea of a real plane, a plane would have to aim north to go east in that case. But that's not what happens. And if that was the case as well, planes would have to land on runways that are moving, and that would be impossible. But how is it that you can take a flight from London to New York and it will take exactly the same time as a flight from New York to London? Yeah, one's with the spin of the planet and the other one's against it. So it doesn't make sense. They'll say that the whole atmosphere is moving, yeah, with the planet, but that doesn't make sense either, because the atmosphere, say it's that thick, the top layer of the atmosphere will be moving slow, and as further you get in, will be moving faster. So how, if everything is moving like that, how do you get a light breeze that blows against the spin of the planet? How do you get a breeze that goes from north to south? It just doesn't make sense. And again, science will give you calculations and esoteric ideas, but you can go out and look for yourself, and you'll see what makes sense and what doesn't.
My interview with this pilot stunned me, because he confirmed what happened in the Arctic. He also confirmed the Antarctic story, and he said, listen, he says, true you don't want to know what happens when you go across this particular mountain range at the end of the earth. He called it the end of the earth. The end of the earth is what he said to me in this interview in 1991. Okay, I said, is that a colloquialism? Is it a euphemism? He said, he just laughed. He says, no, I'm talking literally.
Yeah.
Look, I can explain. I'm sorry. I need to see you. Meet me in Fuller's office.
I know the truth.
Where are you?
You could call it the end of the world.
Hello YouTube, faithful subscribers, whether you're boosting my ego with positive comments or you're keeping me on my toes with some intelligent trolling, you're all appreciated. Despite the fact that I've already proved flat out that curvature of the Earth can't be measured, and that is not due to any kind of atmospheric refraction, light bending, and despite the fact that I've devised a definitive curvature test using multiple reference points to prove that the Earth is flat, I often hear that it can't be proven either way, whether the Earth is round or flat. So I'm going to take the flatness test a few steps further and go into a bit more detail to prove once and for all that we're living on a plane. I'm going to stick to using photos of the Kaikoura Ranges in the South Island of New Zealand, taken from Wellington's south coast. This gives us a pretty decent range in terms of point-to-point length, as well as a decent range in heights of peaks that we can use. I've been out there a few times taking panoramas, as the spot's just breathtaking, especially at sunset. On the day I was out taking these shots, the conditions were just about perfect. The further away the mountains are from the camera, the lighter they are. That's because there's more atmosphere between us and the further mountains, so they get kind of washed out. Pretty obvious, but this photo demonstrates it nicely. I'm going to pick out a few prominent peaks and color code them for convenience. And now go to Google Earth and find them. And a few weeks later I've found them. It's pretty hard work, but I'm confident that I have found the right ones. But please don't take my word for it, check for yourself. Everything you need is right here. Once again, I'm going to enter the heights of the peaks and the distance from the camera into a graph. Now I go back to the photo and make a horizontal line at the height of each peak, color coded of course. Since the furthest mountain away is also the tallest, I can just cut it at that point, and where that line meets each other point gives us an extrapolation to a 2D view to count for perspective. So hopefully it'll match up to the lines on the photo again. Let's have a look. And once again, pretty much perfect. I'm guessing refraction's not playing much of a part here. I don't think we get a whole lot over the Cook Strait, judging by my experimentation. And what anomalies you can see there, I'm willing to bet would be a result of Google Earth's measurements. We can't expect Google to have accurate data for every nook and cranny in the Kiwi bush. That's some pretty full-on wilderness out there. Now I'm going to do the curvature calculations for each of those peaks and input that into a graph to do a comparison. Let's see how it looks. As I suspected, it's all over the show. Not only does it not match, but some of the lines have crossed over. Any of you ball lovers out there care to explain that to me? I didn't think so. If we get these scales matched up, we can get a rough idea of how it would look if there were any curvature. I'll leave you with that. I'd have to say, curvature thoroughly busted. Once again. Thanks for watching.
Hello fellow YouTubers out there reveling in the cyberspace matrix. Not too bad as far as matrices go, or is that matrices? I don't know, that's irrelevant. Anyway, in my last video I tried to prove that the sun is a whole lot closer than we've been told by showing the shadows of clouds on the ground and crepuscular rays which seem to converge right at the sun as opposed to coming in the atmosphere parallel like. It can be hard to get your head around this sort of thing, and a lot of people probably think this is just a trick of perspective. So to disprove that, I've set up a simulation in After Effects. I've attempted to make a similar scene, and first I'll show you how the shadows of the clouds look with a near sun. Watch what happens as I slowly raise it. As you can see, when the sun gets higher, the shadows of the clouds seem to slowly converge. So let's see what happens when I switch the light to one that's more like the sun, as it's been explained to us. After Effects has the option to make a parallel light source. So, you know, as the sun is supposedly 96 million miles away, 155 million Ks, it's pretty much parallel. As you can see, when I draw lines from the shadows on the ground through to the clouds, they kind of diverge or converge at the bottom. So as I expected, the simulator with the close sun seems to be a much better representation of what we actually see in the sky. And with the sun simulation making parallel rays, as we should be getting from a sun 96 million miles away, the shadows do not match up with the reality we can witness with our own two eyes. So how far away did they tell us the sun is again? Because you know what? I've got to call bullshit.